I'm John Stevenson, and we'll be looking at Alexander the Great in our continuing study of ancient history as a framework for the Bible. If we go to Greece, we note the city-states. Remember that Greece was not a unified country. It was broken up into a number of city-states. Key among them were Athens and Sparta and Thebes. Greece, after the failed attempt of Persia to conquest that land, the Greeks had gone back to doing what they loved to do, fighting among themselves. In fact, Sparta and Athens had conducted a 30-year war, the Peloponnesian War, that brought Athens virtually to its knees, and yet Sparta did not destroy Athens, and so the city continued to exist. Meanwhile, to the north, we have the Kingdom of Macedonia. They were so far north that they weren't really considered Greeks, even though they spoke a form of Greek themselves. King Philip of Macedon is going to change all that. He had, in his younger years, been a hostage in Thebes, and there he had gotten a chance to see a first-rate military organization. When he becomes king in 359 BC, he sets out to modernize his army. The Greek hoplite formation had traditionally gone into battle carrying spears and shields. He changes that. Philip increased the length of the average spear to 18 feet so that the enemy facing the Macedonian phalanx would find himself in a position a bit like trying to have a fist fight with a lawnmower. Philip takes as his wife Olympia of Epirus. It's a marriage of alliance in order to secure an alliance with his neighboring kingdom. And they have Alexander. The story is told that when he was just a young boy, some Persian envoys came to visit with Philip. And Alexander comes in and begins to cross-examine them, asking questions about the condition of the roads and the might of their army. Another story is told of when Alexander's father, Philip, had purchased a stallion that could not be ridden by any of the king's grooms. Philip was on the verge of giving the horse back when Alexander offered to ride it himself. Philip said, well, if you could ride it, you can have it. And Alexander took the horse, turned his face into the sun so that he could not be spooked by his own shadow, and then jumped on the horse and managed to ride him without any problems. The horse, whose name was Bucephalus, was going to be his mount throughout most of his campaigns. Philip obtained for his son the services of Aristotle, who became Alexander's tutor, gave him a keen and questioning mind, and prepared him to be the eventual king. Philip died when Alexander was 20 years old. It was in 336 BC, and Alexander immediately faced a revolt. He spent the year quelling those revolts and assembling the Greek city-states into a League of Nations, leaving out only the southern Peloponnesus and Sparta. He then turned his attention, gathering his forces, crossed the Hellespont with the announcement that he was going to invade Persia and punish the Persians, ostensibly, for their past treatment of Greeks. The first battle that he would face would be the Battle of the Granicus River. He was forced to charge across the river. His military career almost ended here. Alexander was actually unseated in the midst of the battle. But he did come through victoriously, as he would do in each subsequent battle. Alexander would fight a number of battles, always personally leading the charge, always victorious. He made his way down the Ionian coast, most of the cities opening their gates to him, and then from there he turned north up to a place called Gordium. There was here a famous chariot that had been tied up to a post, and the local legend said whoever could untie the Gordian knot would be the ruler of the world. The story goes that Alexander came up and looked at it for a bit, and then he pulled out his sword and gave what has come to be known as the Gordian solution. He cut through the knot in one swift stroke. From Gordium, Alexander moved southward and eastward, crossing the Taurus gates, a pass that was left unprotected, and then moved down into the Levant. As he arrived here, Darius and a second Persian army moved in behind him, cutting off his retreat, also cutting off his supply lines, forcing him to now turn and fight. As the battle began, Alexander had stationed himself on the right flank, and he personally led the charge across the river leading his companion cavalry against the pavilion where he could see Darius had been stationed. As Darius saw him approaching and realizing that he was in danger of being either killed or captured, Darius jumped in a chariot and fled the scene, leaving his army, and his army quickly broke up after that, now that they were leaderless. Alexander not only won the battle at Issus, he also captured the family of Darius that had been brought there to the battle. From here, Alexander moved southward, coming now to the city of Tyre. Each city up to this point had been opening their gates, allowing him to come in, allowing him free access, and declaring their allegiance now to Alexander as he proclaimed himself a liberator. But this changed as he came to Tyre. As the battle began, Alexander had stationed himself on the right flank, and he personally led the charge across the river leading his companion cavalry against the pavilion where he could see Darius had been stationed. As Darius saw him approaching and realizing that he was in danger of being either killed or captured, Darius jumped in a chariot and fled the scene, leaving his army, and his army quickly broke up after that, now that they were leaderless. Alexander not only won the battle at Issus, he also captured the family of Darius that had been brought there to the battle. From here, Alexander moved southward, coming now to the city of Tyre. Each city up to this point had been opening their gates, allowing him to come in, allowing him free access, and declaring their allegiance now to Alexander as he proclaimed himself a liberator. But this changed as he came to Tyre. The Phoenician city of Tyre was home to the mightiest navy in all the Mediterranean. The city was right on the coast, with its citadel located on an island a half a mile off the coast. And since Alexander had virtually no navy, that meant that it was impossible for him to reach the citadel, the fortress of the city. When he demanded that Tyre surrender to him, they refused. Not to be outdone, Alexander now began to build a causeway from the mainland out to the citadel island fortress. It took him 7 months to do so. He was under constant attack, and for building materials, he took every piece of scrap, every stone from the mainland part of the city, and used those as his building materials. In the summer of 332 BC, after a siege of 7 months, he broke through to the city, captured it, sold its inhabitants into slavery. You can go to Tyre today. The citadel still remains there, although now it's just a mere fishing village. And the causeway which Alexander built has now, sand has sort of swept in from the tides over 2,000 years, and now connects it as a long peninsula. It's interesting that the Bible gives a prophecy. Ezekiel chapter 26, verses 2 and 3 gives a prophecy because Tyre has said concerning Jerusalem, "Aha, the gateway of the peoples is broken, and it has opened to me. I will be filled now that she is laid waste. Therefore, thus says the Lord God, behold, I am against you, O Tyre, and I will bring up many nations." Notice not just one, many nations against you, as the sea brings up its waves. You know how waves come up one after another. Accordingly, the prophet goes on to say how many nations will come up against Tyre, that her walls and towers would be broken down. By the way, that first happened under Nebuchadnezzar, who came and besieged the city, taking the mainland city after a siege of some 13 years. The prophecy also speaks about how the debris of the city would be removed, and that Nebuchadnezzar would attack it. That was fulfilled just the way the prophecy had said. But you get to the point to verse 12, later on in the prophecy, it talks about how eventually the stones and timbers from the city would be thrown into the water. And that was not fulfilled until Alexander came and used the materials of the city to build his causeway out to the island fortress. The prophecy goes on to say that Tyre would be a bare rock and a place for the spreading of nets. As I said, you can go to Tyre today. There is a fishing village on the site. You go down about 3, 4, 5 miles to the south, and you see a city named Tyre, but it's not located in the same spot where the original Tyre was located. The prophecy says that the city would not be rebuilt. You can go there today and still see the ruins. Alexander continues on southward now. He comes to Gaza, which is another city that refuses to open its gates. He lays siege to the city of Gaza. And while he is here, he sends some troops up to Jerusalem to get supplies. They lock their gates to Alexander. Again, that means that Jerusalem is going to be destroyed. So a contingent is sent up with orders to take and destroy Jerusalem. Josephus tells the story of how the high priest took a copy of the Old Testament scriptures, the book of Daniel, and went out to meet Alexander himself, leading a procession of priests all clothed in white. Josephus says when the book of Daniel was shown him, wherein Daniel declared that one of the Greeks should destroy the empire of the Persians, he supposed that himself was the person intended, and he was then glad. He was not only glad, he told the Jews they could continue with their form of self-government, although they would now pay their taxes to him, and he left them alone, did not destroy or even set up a garrison within the city, and continued on his way. Alexander did continue on his way now, coming to Egypt, and finding little resistance there, he continued on to the west all the way through the desert to the temple of Amun. Why did he undergo this long, hazardous trip? It was for propaganda purposes, that he might be declared by the Egyptians not only a pharaoh, but a god. He returned to the Nile River, and here on the shore of the Mediterranean, he had established a city named after himself, the city of Alexandria, which continues to be one of the major cities. In fact, it's the second largest city today in all of Egypt. From Alexandria, he now turned back toward the Persian Empire, marching all the way into Mesopotamia, and finally meeting the Persians for a third time at near a town called Arbela. The climactic scene in the battle is captured in a mosaic in Pompeii, where Alexander is leading his companions in their charge against the Persian lines. Darius, seeing he's once again in danger of being captured, leaps again into his chariot and flees the battlefield. Alexander had won once again against the Persian army. Alexander now moves from Arbela down to Babylon. The gates of the city open to him without a fight. He captures the city of Babylon. And from here he moves first to Susa and then to Persepolis, burning the city to the ground for what they had done to Athens 150 years earlier. From here he continued to the north and then to the east in pursuit of Darius, eventually catching up with Darius only to find out that the Persian king had been killed by his own people, leaving Alexander the undisputed ruler of the Persian Empire. For the next several years, Alexander continued to the east, up into the Hindu Kush, and all the way to the borders of India, fighting, winning, only turning around when his men refused to go any further. He finally came to a last river, and he said, let's go fight one more battle. And they said, no, we want to go home. And then he finally consented and brought them back to Babylon. Alexander had conquered an empire the size of the continental United States. If you measure the distance from Macedonia all the way to India, it's like going from the state of Washington all the way to the tip of Florida and maybe even a bit further. To effect cultural interchange, Alexander urged and coerced his men to take Persian brides. He urged this sort of intermarriage between his armies. He had Persian contingents within his armies and Persian nobles taking positions of high responsibility. So that the world of Alexander was changed within the space of 10 years. We have this cultural interchange from east to west, a great deal of scientific learning going in both directions, as well as the process of Hellenization, that is, Greek thought, Greek philosophy, and even Greek language now became regular throughout the entire known world. Alexander died. He was in his early 30s, came back to Babylon, became sick, and as he lay on his deathbed, his generals gathered around him, asking him, "To whom do you give your kingdom?" He whispered out, "To the strongest." And what that was going to do was to leave the world open to whoever could take it. But we're going to see that story next time.